Today, I'm going to talk to you about how important it really is to invest. Nowadays, investing shouldn't be an option. Nowadays, investing is an obligation. Why? For several reasons. Among them, the most important, inflation, which eats away at us every day, month after month, year after year. We know that inflation right now is around 3 or 4%, but we've even had inflation as high as 10%. That's what the official data says, but in reality, we all know and feel in our wallets that inflation is much higher than that. All we have to do is look at the prices of anything we consume in our daily lives. 5 years ago, when what we all know happened in 2020 on an international level when we were locked down at home, we've seen that everything has become much more expensive. But everything hasn't just gotten more expensive because prices went up for no reason, but because our money is worth less. What happened in 2020 was, and we noticed it more aggressively, a massive printing of money. In other words, a huge amount of money started being printed and governments began to go into debt. The United States, through the Federal Reserve, was requesting dollars. In Europe, for example, in Spain, we would ask the European Central Bank for euros. And what this did was, by printing so much money, there were more units of euros or dollars in circulation and our money became worth less. What happens is that the more money we print or the more we go into debt, the less our money is worth, it loses its value. Just to give you an idea, 100 years ago, let's say in 1925, a person who had $1 million had the same purchasing power as someone who has $1 billion today. In other words, 100 years ago, if you were a millionaire, if you had $1 million, you could own several mansions, several businesses. You could even have your own private jet, if such a thing existed at the time. You could have absolutely everything. You were one of the richest people around, a person with $1 million. Today, with $1 million, you can hardly do anything. Basically, you just have the chance to start having some stability in your life. And nowadays, someone with $1 billion is a person who is completely out of reach for almost everyone. We're talking about people who own major companies, right? So what happened here? Why did someone 100 years ago with $1 million have the same purchasing power as someone today with $1 billion? It's precisely because of all the inflation we've had over these past 100 years. We've gone through a First World War, a Second World War, plus all the inflation that has occurred in the world in general. We've noticed it over the past 100 years, especially in countries whose economies have been abused and out of control, right? For example, we've seen it in South American countries like Venezuela, like Argentina, which have experienced extremely high inflation. There are many more countries that have also experienced extremely high inflation. And in the end, what they've seen is that their money is worthless and they've had to try to escape from their own local or national currency and adopt other more international currencies, like the dollar, for example. We've seen, for instance, how Argentinians have tried to adopt the dollar in order to survive, to be able to preserve some wealth. But that inflation, that runaway inflation, has already come knocking at our doors. It has reached the doors of the dollar, it has reached the doors of the euro, and the only fiat currency that still seems to be holding on, trying not to be so heavily affected by inflation, is the Swiss franc. The Swiss franc, because in the end, well, we all know that Switzerland is like the head of the world, right? That is, even though it's not a world superpower or anything like that, Switzerland is neutral, right? Switzerland doesn't get involved in conflicts, Switzerland doesn't get involved in wars, Switzerland finances everything. And within Switzerland, well, the main rulers of the world are living there, right? The owners of major banks, the heads of the great families that control the world. And in the end, well, Switzerland is neutral. That's why inflation in the Swiss franc stays much more stable than in other currencies. But the other two great items, like the dollar and the euro, are already being affected. We've seen it clearly. A 10% inflation rate in the dollar, which is what we've had for the past couple of years, is practically intolerable. We're talking about the fact that for every $100,000 an American citizen has saved, in just 1 year they've lost 10%. In other words, they've lost the value of $10,000. For every $1 million you've lost $100,000 in just a single year. For every $100 million you've lost $10 million in just 1 year. That's why the richer you are and the more money you have, the more you try to protect yourself from inflation, or the more you try to escape from fiat money. A lot of people confuse being rich, being a millionaire, with being someone who has a lot of money in the bank or a lot of cash, and that's not the case. Truly wealthy people, millionaires, people with great purchasing power, don't have money in the bank and they don't have money under the mattress. They have it invested in properties. The richest people in the world have their money invested in shares of major companies, in properties, real estate, which they rent out, manage in businesses. And when they want to try to create new businesses or make new investments, what they use is this great wealth they have not in dollars, but in assets. We've mentioned stocks, we've mentioned properties, we've mentioned gold, anything you can think of that protects them in a big business, a major company. What they do is use this wealth to take on debt, to mortgage themselves, to take out loans. And in this way, these people with great purchasing power don't have to sell their wealth. They don't have to sell their assets, because if they did, they would be making a sale, and that sale would be subject to taxes. However, if these people use their great purchasing power to take out a loan, to go into debt since they are solvent, individuals' loans are tax-free, and that's an advantage for them. If you take out a loan that is tax-free, invest it in something that generates income for you, and with that income, you not only make a profit, but also pay off and repay your loan, in the end, you live without paying taxes. That's why a lot of people will tend to be somewhat envious of people who have money, but those people who have money are actually using their heads, or they have a kind of financial education in their minds that's quite different from what is taught in conventional schools, or from the average education that most of us humans on this planet have, right? Because the system as a whole is designed so that you, as a citizen, become poorer, so that you submit, so that you don't aspire to. But nevertheless, you forget something very important, which is that each and every one of us is capable of becoming financially free, of becoming rich, of becoming millionaires, call it whatever you want. Everyone, regardless of where you are born. You could have been born in a hole in the wall, you could come from an extremely poor family, you could come from a tribe in Africa, you could come from, I don't know, the worst slums you can find in any city in the world. Anyone, if they set their mind to it, has the opportunity to achieve that financial freedom. You simply have to believe in it and fight for it. Obviously, if you've already had it drilled into your head that you're not capable of, that you won't be able to do that, that it's for other people, that it's for the privileged, that it's for people who are born with certain advantages, then you're limiting yourself. You yourself are the one who, in your subconscious, is feeding yourself the wrong words like "I can't," "that's not for me." And you are creating a reality for yourself, which is the reality of "I can't." And obviously, if you believe you can't, you won't achieve it. However, the people who succeed change the mechanism, they change their mindset, they reprogram their minds by putting different kinds of words into their heads. I can do it, I'm going to achieve it. I believe in myself, I truly am capable of reaching these goals. And in the end, the only thing that changes between one person and another, between those who succeed and those who don't, is their mindset. It's simply their mindset that makes and marks the difference between those who achieve success and those who don't. Between the conformists and the non-conformists, between the conformist who says, well, I was born this way, I was born poor, so I have no choice but to stay poor, because of course, at most I can aspire to a salary and be grateful to my boss. However, the other person says, hey, I don't want to just aspire to a salary, I want to aim for more, I want to be free. I have a life that lasts a certain amount of time, I don't know how long my life will last, it could be longer, it could be shorter, no one ever knows when it will end. Since time is the most precious and the scarcest thing we have. Time can't be bought with anything at all. It doesn't matter if you're the healthiest person in the world who takes the best care of themselves. When death comes for you, it comes, and that's it. And it doesn't ask if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're healthy or not. Obviously, there are factors that influence it, right? If you live a very toxic life, very caught up in drugs, bad habits, unhealthy food, not exercising, then you're going to speed up the process of your own death, right? If you take care of yourself, maybe you have a better chance that it won't come so soon, but in the end, when it comes, it comes. And the point is that in the time we have, which we never know how long it will be, we should do things right, make the most of it, and above all, enjoy our lives. Because in the end, why are we here? To be slaves, to suffer, to cry. We live in a time where most people suffer from psychological problems, suffer from anxiety, suffer from depression, suffer from problems in general. Centuries or even millennia ago, humans didn't suffer from these things. We just had our basic instincts. We would go out to hunt or gather, go hunt a mammoth. And if we ate, we were the happiest people in the world. There weren't things that affected our minds, right? That way, there was no depression or strange issues. However, now there are. Why? Because of how the whole system has evolved. The system has obviously evolved for the better, but also for the worse. But above all, it's a system based on control and controlling the masses. That's why 5% of the population holds 95% of all the money in the world. And then we have 95% of the population that only has 5% of the world's money. In other words, the majority holds the minority of the power and the minority holds the majority of the power. And this is always going to be the case. In fact, there are studies that say if you took all the money in the world and distributed it proportionally and equally among all the people on this planet, in other words, if we all had exactly the same amount within about 5 years, which is what I tell you, that you can go from zero to being financially free in a period of 5 years, everything would end up exactly the same as before. That is, 95% of the money would be in the hands of 5% of the people, and 95% of the people would have 5% of the money. Why? Because it all depends on mindset, on how you do things. I could give you €1,000,000 right nowhere, take €1,000,000, and depending on how your mind is set up and the knowledge you have up here, you will either go broke or become wealthy. Once you make your first million, the second one is either easier to get or you lose it much faster. I could give you $1,000,000 and you might take that million and turn it into $2,000,000 because you know how to invest it, how to manage it. Or I could give you $1,000,000 and you spend it all on boats, prostitutes, a mansion, a Ferrari, and all kinds of luxuries and whims. And in the end, you'll end up hurting yourself, you'll go broke. So it all comes down to what you put in your mind. It all depends on the skills you believe you develop. Hey, I want skills to make money. Hey, I want scarcity skills, and I'm going to use my time to go partying, to waste time, to watch crappy shows, to read gossip magazines. Hey, I'm going to use my time to study, to learn, to develop good habits, to improve, to train, to nourish my mind, to nourish my body, and to keep getting better every day. Because in the end, as long as we have energy, as long as we're alive, we can always keep improving, keep rising to a better version of ourselves. In the end, it all depends on us. You could be, let's say, 40 years old and think, wow, I'm at a point in my life where things could get worse. Because as you get older, if you don't take care of yourself, you'll start having aches and pains more and more. And after 40, you'll start to decline, you'll start to deteriorate. Or you could say, I'm 40 years old, but I'm going to keep taking care of myself. I'm going to keep growing. I'm going to keep developing. I'm going to keep improving. And then we can see on television, right? We see movie actors in their 40s, 50s, 60s who look amazing. We see Brad Pitt 60 years old, and honestly, plenty of 25-year-olds would love to be in Brad Pitt's shape at 60. So what has Brad Pitt done, right? People say, well, he has a lot of money, this and that. Yes. But I'm sure he has good habits. I'm sure he takes care of himself. In the end, it all comes down to how you treat yourself. If you treat yourself well, the universe and life will treat you well. If you make an effort, you'll be rewarded. If you give, you end up receiving. If you give bad things, you get bad things in return. If you give good things, you get good things in return. But in the end, the most important thing is to progress, to keep moving forward. That's why in today's society and with the way the economy is evolving and advancing, the most important thing right now, something that should be mandatory for all of you, is to invest in order to fight inflation. In other words, if you're not doing it to make money, at least do it to protect what you have, to fight inflation, and then to have the chance to grow more, to keep developing ourselves. But at the very least, if you have no aspirations, at least use that knowledge that inflation is eating away and burning through your money year after year to say, well, maybe I don't aspire to be rich. I don't aspire to be a millionaire. I don't aspire to more, but at least I aspire not to lose what I have. I aspire at the very least to be able to maintain what I have. And if that's your aspiration, then investing becomes an obligation for you. It's something you absolutely have to do. So use this video, use these words I've shared with you here to take action, to grab hold and take the first step, to go out there and say, now is the time to invest. Invest wisely, to educate yourself, to learn, to grow. The other day I recommended this book to you as a starting point. I don't know how to start. Start by furnishing your mind. Start by reading Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Start there, read it, and once you've read it, analyze it, learn from it, and say, okay, now with these concepts in my mind, I'm going to see how I can take the first step. I'm going to see where I should invest first, whether I invest in Bitcoin, in the S&P 500, in index funds, in real estate, in gold. I'm going to figure out how to do it. But from there, you'll start to improve, you'll start to invest, and you'll begin to develop those small habits that will change your life for the better. But don't forget, investing is not an option, it's an obligation. If you found this video helpful and useful, give it a like, share it with anyone you think might need it, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this one. With that, I'll say goodbye, sending you a big hug, and see you next time.